Hello, everybody. It's great to see you all here. Thanks for inviting me here. And today we're just going to talk about automation. We've heard quite a few folks mention it already in the previous talks. The use of automation, SOAR products like Times, Torque, and so on and so forth. Here, we are really going to show you like three things today. I mean, number one, convinced that blue teams are using these automation platforms to speed up operations, and like what are the high-level principles which they're thinking about when they're looking at an automation platform. Secondly, Jason is going to show a really great demo. Also, other use cases, not just for blue teams, but red teams and purple teams, to apply the same principles that made these blue teams extremely successful in the operations and bring it over to your offensive operations. But lastly, I think this haven't really been spoken much before, but to understand that these automation security platforms are actually architecturally very similar to other SaaS products in non-security realms. And I think there's a lot of opportunities and also vulnerabilities that align up in that space, especially if folks are looking at SaaS vulnerabilities these days. I think some of these vulnerabilities also translate over to the security SOAR world that should be looked into. But first, why are we even giving this talk? So as explained, I'm a vendor building a SOAR product. My co-founder and I wrote all 50,000 lines of code of the SOAR, and so understanding vulnerability is something I care a lot about. And Jason?
Hey, what's up, everyone? My name is Jason. I got to tell you guys, I am super excited to be here with you guys. First, I want to say thank you to SANS, all the people out here that were helping make this an awesome event that it is. A quick couple little things about me. Like Steve said, I'm a penetration tester. I mostly do offensive security work. And what I want to explore and have you guys take away from this is basically by the end of this, I want to give you guys some ideas to take back purple team automation. How can you guys, the red teams and the blue teams, do some realistic, practical stuff you can take back to your org and be able to use that? Other little thing is there's a new SANS class called Security 598. I'm an author. I previously was teaching the Cloud Pen Test class for SANS, and this 598 class is really just about automation for red and blue teams and Terraform and this type of security orchestration stuff. So if we have enough time, I've been developing a bunch of open source tools. Hopefully, I'll have some time to show you guys some of the tools that tie into this. And lastly, hopefully we can have a demo. It's horrific. It's going to be really spooktacular if I'm able to pull it off. But we'll see. Chris, back to you, man.
All right, so back to the high-level principles of a SOAR. So what is a SOAR? It sort of this weird terminology called security orchestration, automation, and response. And the definition from Gartner is this: it defines incident analysis and response procedures in the digital workflow format. It seems quite technical and specific, but you've probably seen tools like this before, where you got a click and drag node, where you got different actions and you connect it up and you run play and then execute these automations. But what I find really interesting about Gartner's definition about digital workflow format is that under the hood, these things are just JSON YAML instructions like you see in GitHub Actions, any CI/CD pipeline, translated into a no-code platform and then executed behind the scenes. Actually, a lot of these SOAR platforms that you hear, security, SOAR, automation, hyper automation, whatever you see from Gartner, under the hood, they all look very similar. There's a front end, there's a back end, and there's like some kind of scheduler worker system that takes up jobs in a DAG, like graph-like structure, and executes it. Once again, the goals of the talk, as I mentioned, first of all, what is core, who cares, Jason, and then exploiting the blue team SOAR, which requires, once again, remembering the architecture I showed you just now. So first of all, who doesn't care? Well, according to Gartner, SOAR is dead. So this no-code automation platform is dead. Don't really know why, whereas at the same time, automated incident response seems to be up and coming. I think one point I want to make to share for everyone folks here, having actually built one of these systems, is that it doesn't really matter what the vendors tell you. Ultimately, it's still a workflow part under the hood, right? It's still some kind of abstraction on top of a JSON YAML instruction layer. And when you keep in mind, if you look at like, I don't know, pen testing, these SaaS products like Zapier, Retool Workflows, or even Times or other SOAR automation platforms, just remember they're all architecturally quite similar. And what you learn from one SaaS product can actually translate to other products. And that's kind of scary to me. And that's why I'm really glad Jason invited me to give this talk so that we can actually encourage more questions and research into this space. But who does care? Well, SOAR is a very interesting category. It first came about in 2014 with some of these products people mentioned, like Phantom and Demisto, with more recent tools in 2019, 2018, like Torque and Tines. But for the very first time, NIST in, I think this year, released their cybersecurity framework 2.0. And for the very first time mentioned actually the SOAR term in that framework. So like, this is kind of an appeal to an argument for authority, but the point is blue teams across the board, not just the most innovative ones, actually looking at this tool as not just a nice to have, but increasingly a must have as a way to just codify the automated response. And you can see you can use it for detections, triage, enrichment, to speed up eradication, containment, and so on and so forth. I really recommend reading through this as well to just understand what blue teams are kind of thinking about when they're looking to do automations. CISA as well, I think this was a very interesting read just recently in July 2024, where the red team, were attacking a bunch of government places, and their recommendations were threefold. I mean, the classic, like eliminate default passwords, provide login at no additional charge. That's something, that's like the vendor's problem. But lastly, like it'd be great if having like being a builder and the founder of a security tooling program, I realized it's actually extremely hard to find really good information about how to build secure products. I mean, I asked the question beforehand to the great talk on API security, like, how do I understand these issues, but how can we actually defend ourselves? And this is like questions that I would love to be answered and would love to talk to you about after. And lastly, SANS. Also, like, I mean, Jason's going to show how he's in this incredible course about teaching folks how to use automation to speed up their operations, both to, well, three things, like why should blue and red teams care? This is a great book, by the way, called Adversary, Tradecraft, and Cybersecurity. And they breaks it down into like these really nice principles, how we should, like high-level reasoning for why we should actually do automation, and how we should codify SecOps in the first place. The first one is principle of time. I mean, this is pretty obvious, right? Automation, once it's actually implemented, is supposed to be speed up your alert triage and response containment. And I mean, I talked to one really large SecOps team, like a unicorn startup. They have one automation, and all it does is if they believe a user's been compromised, they press one button and it just like closes off all the accounts across all their SaaS products. That's all it does, but it just speeds up like all those operations you need to do, and something that red team should pay attention to and might actually affect your work in the coming years. Principle economy, like obviously once you've built these automated playbooks, you can now do more with less people, less, well, maybe not less tooling, but there's just too many tools, not enough people. Use code to help automate the work that you're doing. And lastly, I think this is not a point that's not really talked about, but something I hear a lot as a founder of a security automation company is like the principle of humanity. I mean, blue teams, incident responders have a very tough job. It's actually very similar, at least looking and shadowing folks doing this job, like gambling. It's got that addictive component. It's got that high and lows. And having automating the playbooks actually reduces that mental strain. It makes it almost impersonal in a good way, and something that is not talked about enough, but also something we should look into. And lastly, I think this is also very interesting. Like I think now that I sort of explained why blue teams are looking at SOAR and using SOAR effectively and improving their operations, like there's just a classic history of red teams looking into blue team tools, like from SIM to EDR, trying to both play with it as in use it for offensive operations, and also ways to exploit it as well. And I think SOAR is something that's not looked at enough. And Jason, yes, so let's take a look at how powerful this thing can actually be.
Thanks, Chris. So guys, we're gonna have a lot of fun having a good conversation here, all right? So one of the things I forgot to say is like how I met Chris goes back to what Mark, the CISO at Brex, was kind of mentioning about at the end. when he brought up about Tines. Tines is an automation, hyper-automation tool, and we have that in the 598 class. We have a lot of fun hands-on labs for blue team and red team using Tines. Well, I saw a social media about Chris and his company with TraceCat, and I got really interested in what they were doing, and I reached out to them because TraceCat is a free SOAR that is very powerful. We're gonna do a hands-on demo and kind of show you guys, but that's keys in there. It's 100% free, and it's very similar to Tines. So if you don't want to pay the commercial, fees of doing a commercial SOAR, if you have software engineers and security engineers, you could take something like TraceCat and go and make it your own and be able to use it. And it's more of an orchestrator for workflows, right? It takes in inputs, it can transform JSON data. You can advertise out webhooks, you can advertise an API, and it can send outbound HTTP requests. So you can do tools integration across all of your security tools. And when I saw what Chris was doing, I saw that they didn't have like a self-hosted version. So I created a PR, I did some research, I worked with them, and I created a Terraform implementation, a Terraform stack of AWS ECS Fargate implementation. And now you can 100% spin up using Terraform your own TraceCat and do automations and explore it. So
Yeah,
that's what we're gonna talk about.
Thank
No,
you.
no worries, man. So let's jump in. Here is, if I have the time, we're gonna talk about each one of these in a little bit, and we'll give a demo. So take a look at what it's saying here. Now, let's not get too excited here. You can R&D any of these. We can take these back, and I'll show you guys. We're working on this stuff right now, stuff like adversary emulation as code. You've heard of detection as code. We're doing adversary emulation as code. But before we get there, there's kind of a methodology to this, right? If you're gonna take this back to your company, you have to first create an MVP. You have to, a couple of little things to think about. Who's gonna be your stakeholder? Who's gonna be your customer within the org that you're creating this automation for? What are the different triggers for the automation? Is it API driven? APIs are everywhere. Is it push, pull? Where do you design those triggers? Which different security tools are you gonna bring together to do your orchestration, right? And then there's the engineering behind these playbooks and the workflows. And then there's executing it, and then having a feedback loop where you're constantly getting feedback. So not trying to go for the grand slam, but maybe try and do an MVP within your org, get a quick win, and then use that to land and expand more of your automation workflows and planning out and really meeting with your stakeholders and planning this out. So let's talk about the first one here. Automated breach and attack simulation. What is this? So some of you guys using Caldera. Any of you guys use Caldera in the room? Caldera is a free and open source adversary emulation platform. And what we're going to talk about here is, I'm going to do a live little demo, but first I'm going to talk about what these components are. I created an open source cyber range that it's an implementation of a breach and attack simulation. It's called automated emulation. Any one of you guys can take this back, and in 1 minute, you can spin up your own breach and attack simulation lab and do these types of attack techniques. I wanted to do this to help expand and automate my offensive security testing. And so I created automated emulation. Here's the open source tool right over here. We're inside of Caldera right now, but automated emulation is right here. And what it does is it spins up one Windows attack endpoint that automatically has an agent registered to Caldera, right? So it's an agent that is doing a callback, and you can send atomic attack techniques through that command and control channel. So that's what we're looking at right here. We're gonna go in, and under agents, look here, we have one Windows endpoint via its PAW ID, and it's registered to Caldera. So now what you can do is you can run atomic attack techniques and do adversary emulation, and you can automate this. How and why? Because Caldera exposes an API. And if you look under here, under the outputs of automated emulation, if I do Terraform output, I got all my nice little outputs. And this took a minute to spin up. Anyone can do it with an AWS account. But it also spins up Vector, which is a purple teaming tool, but it has an API cheat sheet, and it creates an API key for you to automate. Now, what you can do here is this is a nice sandbox test lab for you to safely run attacks, but you can actually put this inside of your org as well, put it in a dev environment, test it out, and eventually move it into production, right? Just like you're creating software. So this is the automated adversary right here. And we're gonna do a live little demo. You ready to do this? Let's play around with this. So we have our Caldera system. What we're gonna do is we're gonna connect it over to our SOAR, and our SOAR, as Chris was saying, can send API calls outbound. So what you can do here is you can create embedded adversary operations and have your SOAR orchestrate those attack simulations. So now we're looking at the offensive red team side of using a SOAR. So it's adversary emulation as code, sending the calls over an API over to Caldera, and then those attacks run, right? So let's do that really quick. Let's do a quick little demo. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go into, this is our implementation of self-hosted TraceCat. It's hosted in AWS ECS Fargate. And I'm gonna go ahead and upload this digital workflow right here. So Chris actually created this workflow, and he's open sourced the playbook. So it's really nice because it's a community version. One of you guys can go spin this up and practice this. But I'm gonna go ahead and upload this workflow here. And it's Caldera Operations TraceCat right here. So let's upload that. And we got a nice little workflow. And Chris, do you want to talk about what each one of these are doing here since you designed this? But this is the nice visual workflow of the playbook, right? You want to say anything?
Yeah, absolutely. So the part which Jason didn't show is the thing that was uploaded is just a YAML file. I think this is a very important part to remember. And on the side, you can just specify inputs for each of the API calls. There's control flow like if conditions and for loops. And over time, there are some more complex transformations as well, which you can look into and figure out some vulnerabilities we're going to talk about later.
Thanks, Chris. So here is this is our Caldera EC2 instance that we spun up with automated emulation. So I'm going to put this in, and I'm going to save it. So that is the workflow, and we're putting in as an endpoint variable to our workflow here. Then we're going to set up the credentials for our Caldera API key. So we're going to set this up Caldera. And this is going to be really spooktacular if I can pull it off. We're going to pray to the demo gods really quick to make sure everything goes okay. But I like living on the edge. Let's go ahead and do this. So we got the workflow ready to go. We're going to commit our workflow. And you see here, we can advertise out a webhook that's like a callback for receiving traffic from another security tool. So you see how you can do all these powerful security integrations. This is like not just a SOAR, this is like a hyper automation that Gartner's calling. This is like basically you can create all different types of workflows with JSON and YAML. Let's go ahead and run it. Let's see what happens. So we run it. This would be like a manual trigger bypassing the webhook. And let's go to our runs. And I forgot to go look at our Caldera. Operations in Caldera are one or more attack techniques chained together to simulate an adversary. And an operation is when those chained attacks run against a target. That's what an operation is. So let's click on operations, and bam, right there, look, we have Discover running right now against our Windows target. Let's go back to the workflow, and it's populating. Each one of these here is the activity started, the task completed, and then Alice operations, which is running Mimikatz, that's running right now, and it's scheduled, and we're going to see more and more of this populate in here. And so that's just a hands-on automated example, and now we have all three of these operations in here right now. So TraceCat was orchestrating that. It was pausing 18 seconds between the operation. And for some of you guys, I saw someone over here say that you've run Caldera. Caldera is very powerful, and just 3 weeks ago, didn't know if you guys all knew this, they added a capability right over here of a new plugin called Bounty Hunter. Up until this was created, one of the limitations of Caldera is that it didn't support doing the initial access vector and privilege escalation. Now, it's capable of doing more realistic end-to-end, all of the MITRE ATT&CK framework techniques, because you can do initial access vectors and you can do privilege escalation within Caldera. This is bleeding edge new, and I'm going to roll this into my automated tool, automated adversary, but automated emulation. But anyways, you can check that out. And now Caldera is even better. So very, very interesting there. You can check that out. So that is, that's it. We ran the workflow
Can I
and you
just
go in.
add one quick point as well? I
Sure.
think some of you may be thinking, hey, I can just run Caldera's bunch of bash scripts or a Python script. What's the point of a SOAR? I think as Jason showed just now, there's this workflow runs page, right? And now with a SOAR or some kind of automation, no code visual automation platform, your operations provide information, right? So even if maybe you're manually triggering these workflows, every step of the way produces a record that you can then look through again as JSON logs. And I think blue team's gonna use this as well, right? What's the point of automating maybe low-level defenses? Because action produces information, which allows them to do faster threat hunts overall. And those same principles absolutely apply to the red team and purple teaming as well.
Yeah, thank you. This is just the first level, as he said, like you can add on to this, the blue team detection as code. You can actually have the SOAR as the orchestrator where it's running the breach and attack simulation and it's receiving events from your SIM or your EDR and it's measuring the detection ratio of these attacks. So you use MITRE ATT&CK tagging to say, I'm running this technique, and then your SIM is measuring based on MITRE ATT&CK tag. So you can actually do a detection ratio of how effective is my tooling, all the tools coming in your SIM or your EDR, you can measure that way, right? So
Absolutely.
this is just the first use case. We're doing a very simple one to show you guys the power of what we can do here. Now let's talk about some more of these. And so that was the automated breach and attack simulation. Now, automated adversary, the beautiful thing about it is you spin it up, run it for like an hour, and then spin it down in Terraform, and it's like your own pen test lab. And you can add your own payloads and custom payloads inside of the Terraform directories, and it'll automatically load them into the Caldera directories. So when you fire up Caldera, you have all your research there. So you don't have to upload them every time. It's automatically done with Terraform. So it's a nice research lab, spin it up, tear it down when you're done with it. So let's talk about some other use cases, okay? So this is other stuff here that's very interesting. We just did the demo. So the other one here, we've talked a lot about red team implants. We had Jonathan talking about C++ implants. So GitLab, some of you guys have heard of what GitLab is doing. They have a very interesting red team, and they've done some fantastic blogs on their capability maturity model around their red team. So this is an idea, and this is something they open source, is basically they use the Mythic C2 to advance their red team operations. That's right, they took professional dev practices and put it into GitLab, and they have GitLab runners, and they automated basically doing rapid iterations of development of their C2 implants and agents. What they did is they used PyTest framework to have discrete integration testing of their C2, all their Mythic agent and server running on a Linux system. So every time there was a pull request or a commit, they triggered an automatic build via CI/CD to automatically test out the functionality, the communication of Mythic, because they don't want to start a red team with a broken C2, right? So what they do is they iterate and constantly are doing testing of their C2, and it's automated, right? So that's pretty awesome idea. And now what about if we took that a step further? You guys could do something like this with the SOAR. So what if we added SOAR on as an orchestration? We can not only use the GitLab runner, but Chris is working on a Terraform integration with TraceCat. So TraceCat could automatically spin up a Windows Mythic C2 agent, and you could do detection testing of your implant and your C2 agent with Mythic, right? So what if you want to iterate and test out different detections of your C2 and see if your EDR is detecting it? You can test that way, right? You can automate that, and it will automatically spin up a Windows VM with the Mythic agent running, and then you can do automation that way, and that's advancing your red team operation, right? Because as a pen tester, I don't want to go into an organization and find out that my tooling is automatically getting detected right away. I maybe want to evade detection. This is a way to advance your red team operation. Hopefully that makes sense. You want to add anything to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's increasing use of automated playbooks on the blue team side that covers like the first 90% of most common alerts. As a red team, you really should not be tripping up on those alerts anymore. And the best way to test your, well, abilities is to run a SOAR, play around with it, understand how blue team thinks about automated response, and then get better than those automated responses.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. The other use case is something that you guys can easily take back is doing API-driven scripted attack simulations. Let's take Caldera, for example. You can just have a bash script, and like I showed you before, automated emulation already has a cheat sheet of API commands. So you can run and test this out right now. You could create a bash script and hit the Caldera API, and it would automatically run those attack techniques against your Windows agent. So it's a very simple form of doing automated over an API, right? Then we can have our SOAR, TraceCat, we can have it doing an API call to Caldera and pulling out the results of that. And so that's another way, just a simple automation, just giving you guys ideas on use cases for using this. So that's the API-driven attack simulations. Now, this is a use case that's very interesting, and we have this in the 598 class right now. So it's very similar to the attack demo I gave you guys, except we're adding a CI/CD as the version control system, and we're doing adversary emulation as code for real. Adversary emulation as code is the red and blue team are collaborating. They are Git users. They're using their Git client, and those payloads for the Caldera operation are stored in the VCS, and the red and blue team are doing different versioning and tracking of different adversary emulation campaigns like APT29. The Center for Threat Informed Defense has a GitHub repo that has some of these emulation plans in there. You can pull them out, and you can use generative AI actually to generate these as well. But what we're doing here is we're doing a Git trigger with a GitHub workflow that sends an API call to the webhook of TraceCat. TraceCat parses that inbound, generates that into an API call that goes to Caldera, and then Caldera runs the adversary emulation with those operations. So very similar to the demo I showed you guys, except we're using the CI/CD as the storage point for all of our red and blue team to collaborate. So that is true purple teaming, right? If you really look at that, the blue team is seeing what the red team's doing. They're saying, oh, I have these attack definitions. The red team is running it. And then the blue team is seeing that, and they're like, oh, we need to tweak our Sigma rules, our detection engineering, because we didn't have visibility into that attack. So you guys see how that's coming together there? That's the adversary emulation as code use case. Do anything to that, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a big use case of a SOAR is most modern SOAR platforms like TraceCat and others ingest alerts. They're really good at ingesting alerts, and they're very good at retrying alerts and having all that complicated infrastructure to make sure that it's robust and it runs every single time, even if other external events are breaking down. So yeah, really look into this webhook use case because I think a lot of interesting things can be built out of this.
Yeah, and then just really try and go through the rest of these really quick because I know you want to have 5 minutes here. We're coming up to the end here. So the classic detection engineering, right? The detection engineering that a lot of people love this use case. We do this in the 598 class as well. The SOAR is orchestrating, doing the adversary emulation, sending the campaign using the breach and attack simulation agent. And then also there's an EDR agent running on the Windows endpoints. And that, when the alerts generate on the EDR, that comes into the SOAR. The SOAR has a integration into the EDR, and the SOAR is actually measuring with Python code. You can have like a Python Lambda or just some Python code that's using MITRE ATT&CK tags to measure the detection ratio. So this is very powerful for purple teams, right? Because you're triggering simulations and you're actually seeing how the EDR is defending or detecting, and you can even get down to the prevention layer as well. So this is a measurement for detection engineering. It's something that teams are starting to do this type of stuff. This is automated purple teaming, right? You're doing detection engineering, you're measuring, And the SOAR is the orchestration engine, and TraceCat can do that right now. So check that out. That's a nice little use case. And hit up Chris and I afterwards if you guys have any questions. We'll have our contact information at the end. Here's another one. How many of you guys have been in a lab environment where it's just all it is a red team lab or a blue team lab, and there's no static noise, there's no realism, right? This is a realistic use case because have any of you guys heard of a ghost NPC? Ghost is non-player characters created by Carnegie Mellon, and I open sourced a lab called Ghost Playground. And basically, they have API-driven real users on the network doing things like checking their office documents, checking email, stuff like that. So I created a realistic lab that spins up an Active Directory domain controller, a Windows domain join system, and it orchestrates ghosts, the client, and it creates non-player characters. And the characters it's a JSON, and they're doing things like opening up Office, they're doing stuff. And so these logs are streamed into Elk Stack. So it builds an automated Elk Stack. It automatically ships the logs, like sysmon logs. So you spin this up, and you've got user behavior on the network already. Add on to that Atomic Red Team, Purple Sharp, all the Red Team tools, which it automatically spins that up as well. So you can do realistic adversary emulation, and your SOAR can orchestrate this. This is powerful. In the SOAR, you can have playbooks that send API calls to the Ghost API, and the Ghost API can take that in and then change the user behavior of the NPCs on the network. So then you have a very realistic user lab, and this is called Ghost. So you can check out Ghost. This is another idea for using a SOAR.
And a system of record, right? These are three separate systems. Now the SOAR becomes the unifying record for all these operations being done.
Yep, and it's integrating between the tools.
Absolutely.
And it's just parsing JSON or YAML
Yeah.
data. Finally, cloud adversary emulation. A lot of you guys are really starting to look in this area about how do I emulate cloud adversary behavior. There's a whole MITRE Cloud TTPs. You can check that out. There's all these tools down here on the bottom. But basically, you can have API-driven attack simulations using some of these tools right here, Stratus Red Team, or you can spin up in a container each one of these attack tools and then run them against whatever your cloud is. So that's the power of a SOAR tool, because TraceCat can basically have, a payload that runs each one of these different tools. So it's kind of like an orchestrator. You can almost think of it as like, I know someone in the room is not going to like this, but it's almost like a Kubernetes, like an orchestrator, but it's not an application. It's your orchestrating different tools using YAML and JSON inputs and outputs.
Yeah.
And then it can receive API webhooks, and it can also send outbound API calls. So you're doing orchestration between your different tools, and that's the purpose, to bring that together.
That's awesome.
So that's a cap on that. Finally, I created a tool called Purple Cloud, and I just released a monster blog on it, and it was basically automated Sentinel for purple teaming. Any of you guys using Sentinel? Check out my Sentinel for purple teaming, because talking about it basically spins up intra-ID logging best practices, a domain controller, and I could do a whole talk on this. So I'm just going to check that out because I just released it. It's an updated version of my Purple Cloud tool that does basically purple teaming for cloud native attacks, but also on-premise detection engineering, all of that getting sent into Sentinel, where you can do KQL and understand attack and defense labs. All right, so that's it. I'm going to turn it back to you, Chris.
Awesome. Yeah, so we just learned three things today. Number one, like why SOAR is important to blue teams. Second case, how red teams and purple teams can use the same principles that blue teams use SOAR for to make your operations more successful. And now this is something I really care about, which is, as I described architecturally, a SOAR automation platform, like all these API calls look very similar to these other non-security no-code automation tools. And there's this great talk from Luke Jenkins in Push Security, where he described these automation tools as a new PowerShell, right? Just like how you get access to an endpoint, get access to an admin rights over the PowerShell, you can execute scary commands. You can do this very same thing to no code. And this is something I think I would love red teams to look more into and share that research with vendors such as myself. Great talk, check it out. And secondly, I loved when Jason mentioned like this SOAR API looks like a Kubernetes orchestrator. Well, that's exactly right. Like one of the biggest SOAR platforms like Torque is actually built on top of Kubernetes. Other orchestrators, other SOAR platforms like Times is built on this task queue system called Sidekick. Tracecat is built on Temporal. And all of these individual systems have their own weaknesses and exploitabilities like any other distributed system. And it can actually, I think this is something that should also be looked into is as blue teams use more and more automation, can you actually use automations against them, right? For example, what if they're just streaming all their alerts into their Slack? And if other users, non-secure, using Slack as well, can you take out resource constraints there? A lot of interesting things to exploit, and I'd love for you to talk to me after, because this is something I care a lot about and then super paranoid about too.
We got time up too, so.
Yeah, so key takeaways, been talking about this whole talk. Happy to take any questions. Otherwise, thank you very much. And thanks, Jason.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you guys for being here.